Good afternoon. As all of you know, we are approaching tax season, and one of the state government's important responsibilities during this time is to ensure that Missourians are able to file their tax returns in a timely and efficient way. This year, due to a recent ruling by the U.S. Department of the Treasury, there's a specific matter we need to address, and I'm here to talk about today. In August, following the Supreme Court decision invalidating part of the Federal Defense of Marriage Act, the U.S. Department of Treasury ruled that legally married same-sex couples would be treated as married for federal tax purposes regardless of where the couple lives. That means that same-sex couples legally married in another state, but with income in Missouri, now have an option to file joint federal returns. This affects us because Missouri is one of a number of states with a tax code that is directly tied to that of the federal government. In fact, as many of you know, your state tax liability here in Missouri is calculated by using the adjusted gross income that you enter on your federal return. And Missouri law is also clear that married couples who file joint federal tax returns must also file joint state returns. It's pretty simple. If you jointly file with the IRS, you jointly file with the State Department of Revenue. As a result, accepting the jointly filed state tax returns of all legally married couples who file joint federal returns is the only appropriate course of action given Missouri statutes and a ruling by the U.S. Department of Treasury. That is why later today, I will issue an executive order directing the Missouri Department of Revenue to accept joint tax returns from all legally married couples, including same-sex couples with income in Missouri who file joint federal returns. It's important to note that this executive order applies only to the specific issue of tax filing status and does not in any way authorize or sanction same-sex marriage in Missouri, which is not recognized under our state's constitution. I appreciate the Department of Revenue's prompt compliance with this order and look forward to the department continuing to provide quality customer service to Missourians and executing our tax laws in an efficient and effective manner. With that, I'll be glad to take questions.
Governor, do you have any idea of what this means financially to the state? Because there are differences in what the state gets because of who files joint and who doesn't.
I don't have those numbers because you're not sure, how many folks are going to have income in the states that this applies to. So Bob, I don't have those exact numbers, other than say that we will follow the federal treasury rule.
Do you think the state legislature should change the law that requires the state to essentially base its taxes or taxing or returns on the federal system that now recognizes getting marriage?
I mean, I think there are two questions there. I mean, one is, should we be coupled with the federal tax return on that adjusted gross income line? And that's a legitimate discussion from a tax purposes. I think we've come at that a number of times in the last 20 or 25 years, and at most of those times we have continued with the system we have. Which I think most folks think is a little easier, more practical for taxpayers to just take that adjusted gross income at the federal line and move it over your state return. But there is a legitimate public policy discussion as to whether or not some states are tied to it and some aren't, and that's a legitimate discussion.
Governor, the Missouri voters passed a provision refusing to have the state recognize gay marriage. Is that convenience more important than the constitutional provision, or not? What's your opinion?
Well, what we're doing today doesn't violate Missouri's constitution. This is not about the definition of marriage. This is about the structure of our tax code and Missouri law, which is clear. And legally married couples who file joint federal returns must also file joint state returns. The question of whether same-sex marriages should be recognized in Missouri is a separate issue. One that I hope that, quite frankly, the voters have another opportunity to visit. Many Missourians, including myself, are thinking about these issues of equality in new ways and reflecting on what constitutes discrimination. For me, that process has led to the belief that we shouldn't treat folks differently just because of who they are. We still have this constitutional provision in place, and before there was this, it would be necessary to get a vote of the people before that underpinning was shifted.
Do you have an estimation on how many people we're talking about here, how large this group is?
No, I really don't. I mean, you've seen, obviously, this has been a pretty fast-moving situation over the last 6 or 8 months. And I just don't have, we clearly, as tax season starts, it would be some number, because these same-sex marriages are now recognized in numerous states. And there are companies that hire folks, their income and whatnot, and hence we wanted to do this now, once the Treasury really came in.
What about the very specific tax laws that apply to married couples? For example, the circuit breaker exemption or tax credit kicks in, has a cutoff at different levels depending on if you're married or single. Are these people married for all tax purposes? So state-specific tax exemptions for married couples apply.
Yeah. I mean, what we're saying here is that these legally recognized marriages from other states are going to be recognized for tax purposes in Missouri. Yeah.
So if we are going to recognize same-sex marriages for tax purposes, does that implicitly lead to recognition of same-sex marriages for other legal purposes?
Not necessarily, not at all. I mean, I think we have a constitutional provision that deals with that, and in order for Missouri to be a state that would recognize those same-sex marriages, there would need to be a change in that constitution, and the only way to do that is to put someone on the ballot and have people of the state of Missouri vote.
Is it your hope that people do that?
I think it would be helpful if they would. I hope voters would have the opportunity to revisit the issue. I think that, a lot of folks are thinking about issues of equality in new ways, and what constitutes discrimination. And I think, I would certainly welcome another opportunity for that to be on the ballot.
Would your office support such a citizens initiative?
A citizen initiative, whichever way it goes, the ballot, the post office, whichever way. I mean, I don't spend a lot of time saying what should go on the ballot or not. I just say that if this were on the ballot, I would, not support continuing the way that the law is written as it is, that's for sure. Well, Bob's next, I'll come to you.
A while back, the President of the United States talked about how his position was evolving. Am I hearing that from you, that this is something that is evolving in your mind?
I don't think in this or any other setting we should analogize me to him with some of the issues that are going on, but that's neither here nor there. I just, I just have come to believe, after, reflecting on this, I always have, and looking at what discrimination is, and I just don't think we should treat folks differently in this zone anymore. I think if folks want to get married, they should go get married.
Back when I was married, filing a joint return, nobody questioned that relationship. I assume if you and the first lady file a joint return, nobody questions that. If a same-gender couple now, under your executive order, files a joint return, will that also just slide through, or will there be somebody double checking to make sure that it's not?
Well, I think the opposite was really true. If you didn't do this, there would have to be somebody checking. And, in a sense, and you with the only evidence being kind of what the names were, and without going through the list of what names can be and are used by both genders, that's just something that I don't think government should spend their time and resources doing. So I think it's the exact opposite kind of odds is what one of the concerns was, is that you would receive this filing and you wouldn't know.
Speaking of what's discriminatory,